It started on an ordinary Tuesday night when my eyes burned from staring at endless spreadsheets. The office was quiet, just me and the hum of computers. Then I saw it, $3.2 million sitting where it absolutely didn't belong. My coffee went cold as I stared at the number. At first, I thought it was a misplaced decimal point. Maybe someone hit an extra zero. These things happen when you're juggling millions in transactions daily. But when I traced the entries back through 3 different systems, the error held steady, bold, and wrong as a neon sign in a library. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a typo. This wasn't some tired accountant making a late-night mistake. Someone had planted this number deliberately, like a landmine waiting to explode. The question that made my hands shake wasn't what. It was who. And why would anyone risk the entire company like this? I printed the page, my heart hammering against my ribs. The laser printer seemed too loud in the empty office. As the paper slid into my hands, I knew I was holding something dangerous. Something that could destroy careers. Maybe even destroy me. I stayed until nearly midnight, double-checking every calculation. The building grew too quiet around me, just the distant sound of traffic and my own breathing. Security walked past my cubicle twice, nodding at me like I was just another dedicated employee working late. If only they knew. My instinct screamed loyalty. I'd worked at this firm for 6 years, climbed from junior analyst to senior accountant. These people trusted me with their numbers, their secrets, their futures. So I did what felt right. I flagged the discrepancy in an email to the CFO. Found a significant accounting error that needs immediate attention, I typed, attaching the supporting documents. This could impact our quarterly filing if not corrected promptly. I hit send at 11:47 p.m., believing I was protecting the firm and everyone's jobs. I expected gratitude, maybe recognition for catching such a massive problem. Instead, my message disappeared into the digital void like a stone dropped into a deep well. Silence in corporate finance never means safety. It means someone's deciding what to do with you. 2 weeks crawled by without a response. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Nothing. Then payday arrived, and my world tilted sideways. My direct deposit was $800 smaller than usual. Not a small glitch, a deliberate, surgical cut that sliced nearly 20% from my salary. I stared at my phone screen in the parking lot, checking the numbers again and again like they might magically fix themselves. My hands shook as I marched back into the building, straight to the CFO's corner office. He was leaning back in his leather chair, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. "My paycheck," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "It's been cut." "Why?" He looked up slowly, and I swear I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "Budget adjustments," he said, spreading his hands like it was out of his control. "Everyone has to make sacrifices these days." But even as he said it, something cold crawled up my spine. Because I was about to discover that everyone was a lie. I spent my lunch break checking with colleagues, casual conversations that felt like detective work. "How's your paycheck looking?" I'd ask, trying to sound normal while my stomach twisted in knots. "Sarah from accounting got a raise last month. The junior analysts just received their quarterly bonuses. Even the new intern was bragging about overtime pay. Nobody else had been touched. Raises and bonuses flowed like normal while I was the only one bleeding money. I walked back past the CFO's office, and through his glass wall I saw him laughing on a phone call. Actually laughing. The man who just told me about necessary sacrifices was having the time of his life. That's when it hit me like a sledgehammer. He had targeted me specifically. This wasn't budget constraints or company-wide belt-tightening. This was punishment. He'd cut my salary because I'd found his $3.2 million secret. The question that burned in my gut was simple. What did he need to bury so badly that he'd risk everything to silence me? And how far would he go to keep it hidden? That night, I couldn't stop replaying his face from our conversation. The way his eyes darted when I mentioned my paycheck. The nervous laugh that didn't match his words. The way his jaw twitched when he said budget adjustments. It wasn't annoyance I'd seen, it was fear. He looked like a man watching a fuse burn toward a stick of dynamite, knowing the explosion was coming, but not knowing when. That expression haunted me as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and connecting dots I wished I couldn't see. The truth crystallized in the darkness. I hadn't flagged a harmless accounting error. I had stumbled onto his deliberate scheme. The $3.2 million wasn't missing, it was stolen. And he thought cutting my salary would make me back down, shut up, and forget what I'd seen. He'd made two mistakes. First, he'd shown me exactly how scared he was. Second, he'd given me a reason to destroy him. Now I couldn't stop digging. I wouldn't stop until I knew everything. The next evening, I stayed behind after everyone else went home. The office felt different in the dark. Bigger, more dangerous, like it was holding secrets in every shadow. I logged into systems I had access to but had never explored, pulling reconciliation reports and vendor payment records. My hands trembled as I downloaded bank statements and cross-referenced invoice approvals. What I found made my blood run cold. Payments flowing to vendors I'd never heard of. Account numbers that led nowhere. Purchase orders signed by the CFO for services that didn't exist. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This wasn't incompetence or oversight. Every fraudulent payment was carefully crafted, methodically executed. The man I'd trusted with the company's financial integrity was bleeding it dry, one fake invoice at a time. I saved everything to an encrypted flash drive, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the security cameras could see it. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, but it was also dangerous. If he discovered what I knew, it wouldn't just be my job on the line. The weight of knowledge pressed down on me like a physical thing. Every morning, I walked into that office knowing I was sitting across from a thief. Every meeting where he smiled and joked felt like a performance, his mask slipping just enough for me to see the predator underneath. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a witness to a crime that could destroy the company and everyone who worked there. If I moved wrong, I could lose everything. My job, my reputation, maybe even my safety. But if I stayed quiet, the bleeding would continue until there was nothing left. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't tell anyone what I'd discovered. Not my coworkers, not my friends, not even my family. The secret sat in my chest like a tumor, growing heavier every day, but I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. The numbers didn't lie, even when people did, and that left me with only one option: gather enough proof to bury him before he buried me. I started printing documents at odd hours when the office was empty, or nearly so. Pages of evidence went into my purse, then into a thick binder at home. Bank transfers, email approvals, vendor contracts for companies that existed only on paper. Every page I slid into those plastic sleeves felt like armor plating. Email chains where he authorized payments to shell companies, invoices for services never rendered, digital signatures on fraudulent contracts. The binder grew thicker, more dangerous, more undeniable. I organized everything chronologically, color-coded by type of fraud. The pattern was clear. He'd been stealing for at least 2 years, growing bolder as he realized nobody was watching closely enough to catch him. Nobody except me. Late at night, I'd flip through those pages and feel something shift inside me. I wasn't the scared employee begging for fair treatment anymore. I was the hunter, and he was the prey. He just didn't know it yet. The CFO began watching me with laser focus. In meetings, his questions grew sharper, more probing. "How are those reconciliation reports coming along?" he'd ask, his tone casual but his eyes anything but. When I passed his office, I could feel his gaze tracking me like a security camera. He'd dismiss my input in meetings with forced laughter, making jokes about number crunchers who see problems everywhere. The other executives would chuckle, not knowing they were watching a predator try to discredit his biggest threat. But his intimidation tactics had the opposite effect. Every condescending comment, every dismissive laugh, every attempt to make me feel small just fed the fire burning in my chest. He thought fear would silence me. He didn't know I already had his playbook memorized. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. And fury makes you dangerous in ways fear never can. It also makes you reckless, which was about to become a problem. One night, as I downloaded the latest batch of files, I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. My blood turned to ice water. I slammed my laptop shut and spun around, forcing my face into a casual expression just as the janitor pushed his cart past my cubicle. "Working late again?" he asked with a sympathetic smile. "Just catching up," I managed, my voice sounding normal despite my racing heart. But as his footsteps faded, I realized how close I'd come to disaster. If the CFO had caught me accessing those files, it wouldn't just be my job on the line. Corporate fraud investigations had a way of destroying everyone they touched, even the whistleblowers. I packed up my things with shaking hands. I couldn't afford another slip like that. The next time might be my last. But I was too close to stop now. The evidence was almost complete, and soon I'd have everything I needed to end him. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I survived on coffee and adrenaline, my body running on fumes while my mind burned with clarity. Every page of evidence I gathered made me more dangerous, more powerful, more ready for the confrontation I knew was coming. My friends asked if I was okay. I looked tired, they said. Stressed, if only they knew I was carrying enough explosive information to level the entire company. But exhaustion felt like a small price to pay for justice. In those sleepless hours, something fundamental changed inside me. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of his schemes and started seeing myself as his reckoning. I wasn't begging for fairness anymore. I was hunting. And every hunter knows that patience is the difference between success and failure. The hunt was almost over. I could feel it in my bones. Then it happened. The smoking gun I'd been waiting for. Buried in a routine email chain was the CFO's explicit approval of a $400,000 payment to Pinnacle Consulting Services, a company that existed only in his imagination. His digital signature was right there, attached to a purchase order for strategic advisory services that were never rendered. The email thread showed him bypassing normal approval processes, expediting payment to an account I'd already traced back to his personal network. No denials, no excuses, no plausible deniability. His fingerprints were all over the crime scene, permanent and undeniable. I printed the email chain with hands that didn't shake anymore. My binder was complete now, a weapon sharp enough to cut through any lie he might tell. He was cornered, even if he didn't know it yet. But cornered animals are the most dangerous kind, which meant I had to be smarter about how I struck. I couldn't just email this evidence to HR, they'd bury it to protect the company's reputation. I couldn't go to the CEO directly. He might warn the CFO before taking action, and I definitely couldn't confront the thief himself. He'd destroy everything before I could blink. The only way was full exposure. Total transparency. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for next Friday, and every person with real power would be in that room. Directors, investors, external auditors, people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. That was my stage. That's where I'd put his crimes under a spotlight so bright he'd have nowhere to hide. But stepping onto that stage meant risking everything. If my evidence wasn't enough, if they chose to protect him instead of the truth, I'd be the one destroyed. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like freedom. The week leading up to the board meeting felt like walking through molasses. Every day dragged by in slow motion while my nerves hummed like live wires. My hands trembled when I poured coffee. My ears rang with phantom alarms that made me jump at shadows. What if I lost my nerve at the last second? What if the board turned on me instead of him? What if he somehow discovered my plan and struck first? 100 different scenarios played out in my head, each one ending in disaster. But then I'd remember my smaller paycheck, the casual cruelty in his voice when he'd lied about budget adjustments, the way he'd laughed on the phone while I struggled to pay my bills. That memory was enough to steady my hands and quiet my doubts. I had nothing left to lose. He'd already taken my financial security and my peace of mind. The only thing left was my dignity, and I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees. The night before the meeting, I laid the binder on my kitchen table like a sacred object. I flipped through each tab, each page, rehearsing the weight of truth in my hands. Bank transfers, fraudulent invoices, email approvals, digital signatures. 2 years' worth of theft documented with mathematical precision. This wasn't just evidence. It was justice crystallized into paper and ink. Every page represented money stolen from the company, from the employees whose jobs depended on financial stability, from the investors who trusted their money to honest leadership. I zipped the binder shut and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, it ends." But as I said those words, I realized something else was ending too. The version of myself who'd stayed quiet, who'd accepted unfair treatment, who'd believed that loyalty would be rewarded. That woman was dying tonight. Tomorrow, someone new would be born from her ashes. Friday morning arrived with sharp sunlight that made everything look crystal clear. I dressed in my most professional outfit, navy blazer, crisp white blouse, shoes that clicked with authority on hard floors. The binder sat under my arm like a briefcase full of dynamite. The walk to the boardroom felt like a march to war. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, but my steps never faltered. Other employees nodded good morning as I passed, completely unaware that I was carrying enough evidence to reshape their entire company. The boardroom doors loomed ahead like the gates of a fortress. Through the glass, I could see suits and serious faces, charts and presentations, the quarterly ritual of corporate power. And there he was, the CFO, relaxed in his chair, probably thinking about his next fraudulent transaction. I wasn't walking in as a victim anymore. I was walking in as an executioner, and justice was long overdue. The room smelled of polished mahogany and expensive cologne. The CEO sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members whose combined wealth could buy small countries. External auditors had laptops open, reviewing quarterly projections that didn't account for millions in theft. And there was my target, the CFO, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who thought he was untouchable. He was mid-sentence about optimistic revenue streams when I pushed open the door. Conversations died like someone had thrown a switch. Heads turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to mild annoyance. Who was this employee interrupting their private meeting? But one face stood out from the rest. The CFO's smile melted like wax near flame. His eyes locked onto mine, then dropped to the binder under my arm. In that instant, he knew. He knew his kingdom was about to fall. I walked to the conference table without saying a word. The silence was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Board members shifted in their chairs, unsure whether to be angry or curious about this unprecedented interruption. I set the binder on the glossy table with a soft thump that sounded like thunder in the quiet room. Then I slid it across the polished surface toward the chairwoman, a steel-haired woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "This contains evidence of systematic embezzlement," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. 2 years' worth of fraudulent transactions totaling over $5 million. Pages rustled as she opened the binder. Other board members leaned forward, craning their necks to see. The CFO's skin drained of color until he looked like a corpse in an expensive suit. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The noose was tightening around his neck, and everyone in the room could see it. They didn't need me to narrate what they were seeing. The numbers spoke louder than any speech I could have given. Bank transfers to shell companies, invoices for services never rendered, email approvals bypassing normal oversight, digital signatures authorizing payments that went straight into accounts he controlled. The chairwoman's face hardened as she turned each page. The CEO's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. External auditors whispered urgently to each other, already calculating the scope of the fraud. And through it all, the CFO sat frozen like a deer in headlights. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time, dissected by people who understood numbers better than he'd ever imagined. Every fraudulent transaction was laid bare under the harsh light of scrutiny. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The mathematics of his guilt were undeniable, and everyone in that room knew it. That's when he found his voice again, desperation making it crack like an adolescent's. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, gesturing wildly at the evidence. "Clerical oversight, poor communication between departments, those vendor payments were legitimate business expenses." But every lie collapsed under the weight of documentation. The shell companies had no employees, no offices, no services to render. The contracts were backdated. The approvals bypassed systems specifically designed to prevent fraud. His voice grew higher, more frantic. "You have to understand. The accounting systems are complex. Sometimes entries get miscategorized. This woman clearly doesn't understand the full picture." The chairwoman looked up from the binder with ice in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison," she said, using his last name like a weapon, "these documents show you personally authorizing payments to companies that don't exist. How exactly is that a clerical error?" He had no answer. And in that silence, his fate was sealed. I'll never forget the faces around that table. The CEO looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Board members leaned back in their chairs, expressions cycling between betrayal and fury. The external auditors were already making notes, probably calculating their legal exposure. One board member, a woman whose jewelry probably cost more than my annual salary, spoke in a voice like shattered glass. "How long has this been going on?" The chairwoman consulted the timeline I'd prepared. "According to this documentation, at least 24 months, possibly longer." Another board member slammed his palm on the table. $5 million. Gone, while we sat here praising his fiscal responsibility. The CFO tried one more time to speak, but the chairwoman snapped the binder shut with finality. That sound, sharp, decisive, echoed through the room like a judge's gavel. In that moment, everyone knew his career wasn't just damaged, it was obliterated. For months, I had felt small and powerless. He'd cut my salary, dismissed my concerns, made me question my own worth. But now, watching him squirm under the weight of his exposed crimes, I felt the power dynamic flip completely. He was the one scrambling for explanations. He was the one sweating through his expensive shirt. He was the one facing disgrace while I stood tall with truth as my shield. My binder sat between us like a loaded weapon, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the calculated wariness of someone protecting secrets, but the raw terror of someone watching their entire life collapse. He couldn't touch me anymore, couldn't threaten my job or my reputation. The board had seen the evidence with their own eyes, and his word meant nothing against mathematical proof. The hunter had finally cornered his prey. The CEO reached for his phone, probably calling security, while the chairwoman gathered the evidence with grim efficiency. The CFO's protests grew more desperate, but nobody was listening anymore. His credibility had evaporated the moment they saw those fraudulent signatures. When security appeared at the door, he actually tried to blame me. "She's disgruntled," he said, pointing an accusing finger. "I had to reduce her salary due to performance issues. This is revenge, pure and simple." The chairwoman didn't even look up from organizing the evidence. "Mr. Harrison, are you claiming she forged your digital signatures? Created fake email accounts in your name? Fabricated 2 years' worth of financial records?" He had no answer for that because there was no answer. I hadn't forged anything. I'd simply documented his crimes with the same attention to detail I brought to every aspect of my job. The evidence was real because the theft was real. All they wanted now was him gone, and security was there to make it happen. As they escorted him out, he looked back at me one last time. Not with hatred, that might have been easier to bear. He looked at me with the desperate confusion of someone who couldn't understand how his victim had become his destroyer. "You have no idea what you've done," he said as security guided him toward the door. But I knew exactly what I'd done. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over security. I'd refused to be silenced by intimidation or bought off with false promises. And most importantly, I'd proven that even the most powerful predators can be brought down by someone willing to do the work. The room remained heavy with shock as the door closed behind him. Slowly, faces turned toward me, not with hostility, but with something like wary respect. I gathered my things quietly, professionally, letting my actions speak louder than any words. I had delivered the truth. That was enough. The weeks that followed brought investigations, audits, and congressional inquiries. The company survived, barely, after implementing new oversight procedures that should have existed all along. My salary was restored with a retroactive bonus that didn't begin to compensate for the stress I'd endured. But none of that mattered as much as one single moment. The look on his face when he realized he was finished. The exact second his arrogance collapsed into panic when he understood that I, the employee he'd tried to silence, had orchestrated his complete destruction. That fear in his eyes, that dawning comprehension that his victim had become his executioner, was worth every sleepless night, every anxious day, every moment of doubt and terror. Because in that instant, justice looked exactly like a powerful man realizing he'd underestimated the wrong person. Not just the fight, but the war. And sometimes, victory tastes like watching your enemy's face when they finally understand they never stood a chance.